Hello, everyone. My name is Sakthia Chandra. Welcome to the Tech Talk today. The title that we have is Preventing BEC and Phishing Cyber Attacks on Microsoft Office 365 Email. Joining me are two participants. Let me introduce my first panelist here, Anand Raghavan, who's the co-founder and chief product officer at Armorblox. What I like to do is maybe shift gears and talk about where do we go from here as customers, prospects, vendors, innovators. How do we address this challenge holistically? And for that, I would like to maybe start with a little bit of outside view from the analyst. Not that the analyst view is the right view, but more often it is good to understand the data points that we are seeing from the community. One report I would suggest all of our audience who are interested in learning about the phishing attacks and the technology and the trends is the 2021 Email Security Market Guide that just came out in November of this year. And two stats in particular, it's worthwhile to go deeper. The first one is the call out, which states just in the next 3 years, 20% of all phishing, anti-phishing solutions will be delivered via an API integration. Let's try to understand what that really means, because the API integration has a broader connotation here. The second data point is obviously the use of AI and ML-based technology to really protect organizations against phishing, against BEC attacks. So with that two in mind, let's try to zone down the conversation. Again, I'd like to have Anand help us unpack this a little bit more by talking through what does API integration really mean and where and how practical AI ML technologies can come handy to any one of the practitioners in cybersecurity. So Anand, maybe the first question for you to help us with is API based. What does it mean? Why does it matter? And how is it different from what our audience might be used to today in their infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely, Shakti. So one of the big changes that has happened as Microsoft opened up the Office 365 ecosystem is that they want an ecosystem of companies developing applications on top of their ecosystem of APIs that's been opened up. So the Graph APIs for Office 365 was one such set of APIs, which allows vendors to connect into Office 365 email directly without requiring to be inline. Now, being inline, what a traditional secure email gateway does, requires you to change your DNS records, change your MX records, so that if an external organization is sending your organization an email, it first hits the secure email gateway. And that's why the DNS record update is needed. And once the secure email gateway processes that email, then it gets forwarded on to your Office 365 environment, and then it gets delivered to your inbox. Being API-based allows us to plug in directly into the Office 365 environment. Now, there is some nuance here. You can put in a transport rule and still inspect the email as it is being delivered. For the purposes of this discussion, I think that let's keep it simple. But connecting over APIs allows you to just dynamically inspect the emails in the Office 365 environment itself to analyze whether the email should be delivered or not. And that makes it very easy from a few fronts, and we can speak to those. First is the deployment becomes very, very easy. It's literally a 10-15 second call for you to actually go in, authorize, put in your Office 365 admin credentials, and allow an API-based email security solution to connect into your environment. So it's very easy to deploy. It doesn't take weeks to set up and change your MX record and things like that. The second one is that once that is connected in place, there is no other infrastructure changes you need to do as a team. There's no infrastructure for you to manage. Once it's in the cloud. As customers are rapidly moving over to cloud-based solutions, this is another way for them to migrate their email security solution into the cloud as well. The other thing is that over API-based solutions, you can invest your dollars more wisely. So it's more compatible with what you invested in the native email provider in Microsoft in this particular case, and what feature set are you buying from the email security vendor that's a third-party vendor. And we'll go to this in a little bit more detail later on in the webinar. And as a result, this saves a lot of time for the security team to focus on other things. You're not worried about downtime of your seg, which kind of brings down your email deliverability. This is cloud delivered email and cloud delivered email security. So it's up and running with all the HA, high availability, and disaster recovery protocols in place for those services.
And you talked about the graph APIs, and there's definitely a lot more that Microsoft is opening up for the API-based integration for our vendors to really plug into those data sets. But how about G Suite and Exchange, and also the two-way API integration, right? It is just not one way to look at the traffic, but it's two-way. How would you address, I know this tech talk is really about Microsoft Office 365, but I want to take a little bit of detour just to cover those two areas. Importantly, still, some of the customers are on-premises Exchange, and some of them could be in Google. Can you touch on those two aspects as well?
Yeah, so for Exchange, that's a great call out, Shakti. For Exchange, as you mentioned, there's still a lot of, there's in the order of 200 million plus mailboxes that are still on Microsoft Exchange on different variants. And traditionally, developing on Exchange was more difficult. So Microsoft has a class of APIs called EWS APIs. You can use those to connect into the Exchange server environment as well as into the Active Directory that are on-premise. So one of the things that we have spent time doing is we have cloud delivered email security, but we can support on-prem Exchange as well. So we built a small connector that can run inside of the company's firewall, and using the EWS APIs, it can connect to on-prem Exchange as well as on-prem AD and communicate back into the cloud. So everything that you hear in this talk today, all of that applies to on-prem Exchange as well. So as companies have multi-year plans to migrate away from Exchange into Office 365, this API-based approach gives a unified way to kind of manage both the on-prem instance as well as the cloud instance without having to worry about two sets of infrastructure. How do you shut down one while you turn on the other? All of those. So you don't have to worry about whether your emails are protected or not. This gives you the same kind of cover, whether it's on-prem or cloud. So that's one big part of it. The second one you mentioned, the two-way side of the house, APIs, Microsoft has made it very easy to actually take actions on emails over APIs as well. And a big call out here is traditionally with legacy secure email gateways for internal emails, you had to do a bunch of lift and shift to actually hairpin those emails through the segs to make sure that the secure email gateway can actually analyze those emails. With APIs, that's on by default. So all the internal emails get analyzed as well. And you can decide if there is an internal account compromise, and that is what I call lateral phishing campaign. So from a compromised account, the attacker is sending out phishing emails internally. Those can all be automatically detected. So that comes in for free with the APIs. And the two-way makes it easy to take actions on emails before they are delivered. So for example, modifying an email, adding a warning banner, or adding a label to an email, or moving it to a quarantine folder, or deleting the email. All of those actions can be taken with APIs as well. So from an end user experience, it behaves exactly the same way. So the user doesn't have to learn anything new, whether it's inline or whether it's API based. So there's all the savings of the easier manageability, the easier deployment, all of that, without compromising on the end user experience at all.
Wonderful. So it's not just prevention, it's prevention plus investigation, plus threat hunting, plus the ability to respond to threats. The two-way APIs definitely come in handy, and the breadth of the integrations can definitely span beyond 65 to include Google and Exchange. Wonderful. So that was a quick view of API-based integrations. Let's shift our conversation to AI and ML. That's probably the worst buzzwords in the cybersecurity. Every vendor is going to claim an AI and ML-based approach. But the question I have is, what is new in AI and ML that can be applied to email security? And what innovations have you seen in the market that has real practical implications, that has been successful, maybe in other facets, other vectors of cybersecurity, that now can be brought into email security to address phishing, and definitely broader than phishing campaigns from your perspective?
Yeah. So very often when you look at enterprise products, B2B products in the market, inspiration for that comes from our consumer lives. Tech usually leads first on the consumer side of our lives, and then it makes its way into our workplace. So if you look at how we get information in our personal lives over the years, one of the big things we're seeing is customized, personalized information that comes our way. The products that we use understand who we are based on our past behavior, our past consumption of information, and that tailors our future consumption based on the past consumption, recommendation engines, and all of that. So there's one aspect of that that comes in as well, which in our industry, there is the UEBA market, which is the user behavior market. So that's one set of insights and inspiration. The other one is if we look at how we consumed information back when we were in school, there was a time when we had to walk into a library, go to the reference section, check out an encyclopedia, and then sit and read it in the library because you couldn't take it home and take notes on what you needed to do. Then you started getting these encyclopedias on floppy disks, and I'm dating myself here, but you had these big stacks of floppy disks with the encyclopedia stored in them. Then it came on CD-ROMs, and you had CDs. Microsoft was big in this with Encarta. And then you had Alta Vista come in and Google come in, and people started searching for information online, which many of us still do. But more and more people are just asking questions to Alexa and Siri and getting responses back in terms of the questions that they want answers for. So conversational interfaces have become real when it comes to our personal lives. And one of the big inspirations for Armorblox was the fact that when you look at enterprise communications, whether it's email or other channels, so much of the context is in the language in the communications, is in the email itself. So one of the starting theses was, what if we could build an engine that could understand language? And then, of course, understand everything that's specific to this organization. So that boils down to these three buckets of signals that we could be looking at, in addition to everything else that people look at traditionally, the headers and IP addresses and all of that. The three buckets were, the first one is user identities. And the easy way to get to this, well, easy, but not simple. That's something that I learned recently. Not everything that's easy is simple. So you connect back and look at 6 months of email archives and process the headers and process the emails and understand user identity. So people's names, titles, departments, which Active Directory groups they are in, all of that. And then you look at user behavior. So what are the domains they communicate with? How often do they communicate? The reputations of those domains. All of that goes into the user behavior bucket. And the third bucket, which is kind of the more important bucket, is the language bucket, where you're trying to identify specific kinds of conversational patterns. So what are vendors that send you invoices? Can you catalog these vendors and keep track of what kind of invoices they send you? Has your CEO ever asked you to go stand in a line and buy him a Walmart card or an iTunes gift card? Right? You can track all of those to understand what kind of communication patterns exist in an organization. And this provides a baseline to know what is normal for one particular company, which is different from other companies.
Wonderful. So there's always a motivation and a lead, if you may, in terms of technology and innovation. Then it becomes a matter of trying to take the innovation, but make it applicable to solving a particular problem. And in this case, it's email security as a broad stroke. But can you go a little bit deeper into, if I'm a customer or a prospect looking at these different technologies, what do I get? Like, how should I think about rationalizing conceptually what the product does?
Yeah, traditionally, when you purchase something like a secure email gateway, the food analogy there is like buying a burger at a McDonald's. You can pretty much be guaranteed that whichever McDonald's you walk into in the world, it kind of feels the same. The only customization you do, if you will, is if you don't like lettuce or you don't like tomatoes, you pull it out of your burger and there you go. That's your custom burger that you get. And that's been the nature of the industry when it comes to making organization-specific changes. So I purchase a secure email gateway and I customize it. I write thousands of rules over months and years to make sure that all the exceptions, all the domain handling, everything is customized and tailor-made for my organization. And then I don't want to touch it, because if I touch it, what if something broke? So that's the fear in which the industry lives, that I put in so much customization with hard work on my team side, I don't want to make any changes. So I keep adding more rules on top to prevent the new kind of attacks that are coming in, and they still keep coming through, right? So it's an ongoing cat and mouse game of customization with manual efforts. The way we think about it is slightly different, because we have done that 6-month look back and gotten signals about the organization. We are able to automatically build models in 3 layers, if you will. So there is a user-specific model, which is for every employee inside of the organization. What are the communication patterns for that person? Who does she communicate with? How often? What kind of vendors interact with her? So all of that goes into the user-specific model. Then there is the organization-specific model. So for this particular organization, what are the vendors they communicate with? So we can index all the vendors and know what typical communication patterns, typical bank account numbers, typical invoices from those vendors look like. That is very specific to each organization that we go into. And then, of course, there is a global model. So there's about 58,000 tenants on Armorblox today. So if we see a bad sender or a bad domain in any one of those tenants, we can auto-propagate that across all the tenants that we have. So out of the box, the product comes with so much customization that 99% of the work that you need to do is already done. You might want to go and add more things. And of course, you always want to give that choice to the customer, not make it look like a magic box, which does this job and they don't have any way to go interact with it. But now it's optional. It's not required for the product to work. They don't need to put hours and months fine-tuning it for their own use case.
Yeah, definitely. Again, picking an analogy in the consumer world, the days of autonomous cars is definitely, here to come for sure. And even if you just roll back the clock 20 years back, the amount of effort someone had to go through, just getting the art of driving the car and then being present in the road without any sensors, without any help of technology, it is just a day and night difference. And I bet AI and ML will have such a huge impact in terms of driving the simplicity down, but also making sure that you talked about how you can almost near instance propagate any understanding, any learnings from one tenant can be propagated worldwide, literally. So the benefits are transmitted across instantaneously. So you don't have to go through that learning customer by customer, instance by instance. So that's definitely the power of cloud delivered AI and ML, right? So this combination of both the AI and ML models coming together, but making sure that it's cloud delivered and the learnings can be shared amongst all the customers. Let's go a little bit deeper on, and so there's going to be a little bit into the technology. Again, trying to give a quick summary of the AI and the ML models themselves, because once you double click on those, there is still quite a bit of different techniques that we can bring to the table to help address these issues. So do you mind walking us through? You talked a lot about the natural language, where there's content and context of the email, but then there are also other models that specifically address in terms of solving a particular need.
Yeah, so this is one where when we talk to our customers and say that we have AI and ML in the product, legitimately so, the customers roll their eyes because every vendor says they have AI and ML. So it's a very valid question that customers should ask with all the vendors that they're interacting with as to what the customer means when they say AI and ML. And more broadly, there's three things you should look for. One is, how does that AI and ML learn? And that's what we spoke about in the previous two slides. Is it automated? Is it custom to your organization? Or do you have to do a lot of work to customize it? Professional services with the company or your team doing manual work customizing it, right? So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, what happens if it flags a safe email as bad? So there's a false positive, right? How easy is it for you to go make a change and for it to automatically learn? And the third part of it is a false negative. So there's no product out there that's going to catch everything. And of course, AI and ML are not. But when it misses something, how easy is it for it to learn? And we may not go too far down into that in this talk, but there's a whole abuse mailbox aspect to what Armorblox does, which automates away reporting emails that are missed, and models get retrained and automatically learn. So that is that continuous learning loop that you see at the bottom of the slide. Now, just under the hood, what are the pieces that are in place when we say AI and ML? If you need a broader set of detection, it's not just about a broader set of new signals, but it's also about a broader set of algorithms that process these signals to determine if something is good or bad. And without going too deep into each of these, I want to bucket it into 4 different buckets that you see in the slide in the detection techniques. So the input signals, we spoke about the identity signals, the behavioral signals, and the language signals. In addition to that, we also subscribe to a lot of third-party feeds, which other solutions out there have access to as well, third-party known bad link feeds and domain reputation feeds and all of that. That gives us enhanced intelligence. And of course, we can connect into your environment and get sign-in logs and other network firewall logs, things like that, that are custom to your organization too. But these are all feeds from non-email channels that enrich the intelligence that we are getting out of email. Now, all of this goes into a detection engine where there's at least 4 buckets in which we can classify the algorithms. And I'll start with the language one first. There's specific algorithms that you can use that leverage developments in natural language in the last 5-6 years to understand how conversations happen. Like, for example, I can take a sentence and I can break it down to see, back in English grammar, we learned about subject and predicate and object and things like that. And you always forget what each of those are. Now, thankfully, many of this has been programmatically made available. So you can break a sentence down. Like if you take a DLP example, we also do data protection on the product. If you see a 9-digit number, you can actually parse a sentence to understand what does it refer to. Is it a Zoom meeting ID? Is it a social security number? Is it something else? So instead of just looking for a pattern and getting a lot of false positives, you can actually break the sentence down to understand what it relates to. If there is a sentence where it refers to a person as a he or refers to an object as an it, you can actually parse the sentences above this particular sentence or around the sentence to understand what is the object it's referring to. So there's a lot of language-based techniques that you can use. There's techniques called semantic role labeling that actually help you break it down. There's techniques called machine comprehension that actually help you understand the language in a particular paragraph and the intent behind that. And there's a lot of really, really cool stuff in terms of tech that's available there. The next bucket here is statistical techniques. So not all kinds of detection need all of these signals. Like, for example, if you're looking at where a person logs in from to access their email, usually it's 2-3 buckets. Usually it's your work IP address, something associated with that, your home address, and then maybe the Starbucks near your house or something like that. Unless you're in a job that requires you to travel a lot, which is a smaller part of the population, these are clustered very closely, very densely in a couple of IP addresses. And you can use statistical techniques to look for anomalies around that. Is this an outlier when it comes to a new IP address that somebody is logging in from, or does it belong in one of these clusters of signals? So you could use clustering kind of statistical techniques to determine anomalies in data like that. Then there is more traditional machine learning techniques. So if you think about spam is what is traditionally a binary classifier. Is an email spam or not spam? So you could have multimodal classifiers which is trained to look at an email and bucket it into 3-4 different buckets. A good example is an email a marketing email or not? So you could have like a classifier that can go and put it into marketing or a few other categories. And that's a signal that you get out of this multimodal classifier. And then the last bucket is the deep learning bucket, where you have models that are trained on Wikipedia and then custom trained on the language and the emails inside of your organization. And it can do some interesting things. Like, for example, it can parse a paragraph and identify, is there a sentence or is there a phrase of words where there's an intent? Is somebody asking someone to do something? I need you to go do this, or can you go get this for me? All of that goes into the intent aspect of a particular sentence. You can have models that go and detect financial terms. Now, traditionally, this is done using a bucket of keywords kind of an approach. So you have 1,000 words or 5,000 words where you're just talking about financial keywords. But you can have deep learning based models that can actually understand topic hierarchies in language and identify what are financial conversations. And then you have things like urgency sentiment, and you have deadlines, and all of that can be done using these kind of models. So that's using these is where you can identify sensitive business workflows using the language techniques. Where is an employee being asked to do something with urgency and a deadline, where it involves money or data, which makes it very critical. So we do that, we get all of these hundreds of signals and indicators of whether something is good or bad. And using that, we can categorize it into one of these attack types or one of the data loss types. So we do full data protection across PII, PCI passwords. And then you can determine what action do you need to take. Is this email safe to be delivered to the inbox? Do you need to delete it, soft delete and put in the deleted items, or permanently delete? Do you want to quarantine it? Do you want to add a warning banner? If it's an account takeover attempt where a person is logging in from a suspicious location, do you want to lock the user account? All of those actions can be pre-configured. So you don't need to actually manually do this. It's pre-configured once in the environment that you can customize, and the actions are automatically taken.
Thanks, Anand. There's definitely a lot of depth here in terms of details on what kind of AI and ML models and techniques that can apply to securing the email footprint. And again, just going back to some of the themes that we were touching on in our talk, there is parallels to other segments in the security industry, right? Even if you take something like endpoint prevention and protection, companies like CrowdStrike have pioneered, again, AI and ML to bring into bearing. And take any segment in cybersecurity, be it DNS protection, be it intrusion prevention, be it URL filtering, there is a notion of AI and ML coming in and using these models to go beyond just the static signatures, which used to be what the foundational premise was when building a cybersecurity model. So appreciate you sharing the details here. And for our audience, maybe I will pause here with just two takeaways. The first one being, look for an API-driven approach to solving the phishing problem because it drives in the simplicity. It is native to how the cloud-delivered email security vendors are approaching to enhance their ecosystem. That is the way forward. And two, the days are gone in terms of either trying to address it based on static signatures and/or a combination of manual intervention. AI and ML is going to have a huge impact in terms of how you get a handle on phishing and, quite honestly, beyond phishing when it comes to email security. Hope this was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach back to Armorblox. I'm sure one of our experts will be able to drill down deeper into any one of these topics. And that concludes our second part in the Tech Talk series on the topic of BEC and spear phishing attacks on Microsoft Office 365 email. Hope you enjoyed the conversation and picked up a few ideas and information around the innovation and the technology that is out there to help you solve some of the most pressing issues when it comes to email security. Thanks for tuning in. Bye now.